And we're joined now by Eugene Fidel, president of the National Institute of Military Justice. He's also a senior research scholar at Yale University Law School. And retired Lieutenant Colonel Gary Solis was a lawyer in the Marine Corps and now teaches at both Georgetown and George Washington University Law Schools. Eugene Fidel, I'll start with you first. Were there any surprises for you today in these charges?
No, there really weren't. Aside from the slight change in the number of victims, this is what we had been led to believe based on the quite preliminary reports that had come out.
Gary Solis, anything?
I would have expected a few more less significant charges, just as fallback positions for the government if they lost their primary case.
So let's start looking at some of the challenges. Gary Solis, you can start with the chief challenges for the prosecution.
The prosecution does have its challenges. They have to prove that someone is dead, and those people, those bodies have been buried, and they're not going to be exhumed. They have to prove that they died by being shot with a firearm, difficult to do when you don't have a body and you haven't had an autopsy. And they have to prove that Sergeant Bales did it. He was wearing a uniform. It was night, very dark night. He was wearing night vision goggles that obscured his face. He had a helmet on. It's going to be difficult to find anybody who saw him who can testify as to the identity of the shooter. Also, premeditation will be difficult to prove if the defense raises a diminished capacity argument. And finally, I think that negating a diminished capacity argument raised by 3 prior tours, traumatic brain injury, and prior wounding will be difficult.
All right, well, let's hold off on the mental condition issues for the moment. But Eugene Fidel, what would you add? Would you add anything to the difficulties for the prosecution, particularly, of course, with all this being so far away?
Yes, it's a long distance away, and I think the crime scene is probably pretty chaotic, more chaotic than most detectives in the U.S. would prefer. But whether evidence has been successfully gathered or still can be successfully gathered remains to be seen. I mean, it's possible that there may be exhumations, although I think that's problematic under Islamic law. And it's possible that there may be eyewitnesses whose testimony will prove these charges without the necessity for exhumations or DNA evidence or some of the high-tech things that Professor Solis has referred to. I think this is going to be tough for the government, but I don't think these are insuperable obstacles.
All right, so Eugene Fidel, you start us talking, take a look at the defense now, and clearly what we hear is that they'll be focusing on the mental state of Robert Bales with such issues as impact on memory loss, for example.
Well, memory loss does not get you off the hook if there's evidence of criminality. I mean, the question is, what is the other evidence? But be that as it may, first of all, there is the insanity defense, which is provided for under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Manual for Courts Martial. It's a defense that the defense has to carry, and has to carry by proof, clear and convincing evidence. And it has to be evidence of a severe mental disease or defect. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm certainly not a forensic psychiatrist, but I still haven't heard the kind of suggestions that indicate that that defense would be available. That's not to say that there isn't a benefit from being able to show that a person was not playing with an entirely full deck at the time. That might help to soften the blow and provide matter and extenuation and mitigation during the sentencing phase of a capital case.
And Gary Solis, so PTSD is not a defense in and of itself.
Correct.
But what kind of pieces of medical history would you expect to come out, and what kind of impact?
Well, presuming that there's no insanity defense, and Brown has said that there will not be, then there would be a box into which, if I were a defense counsel, I would put the fact that he's had traumatic brain injury, reportedly, that he's been wounded twice, that he's had 3 prior tours before this one, that he's undergone a lot of stress in combat, and all of those things manage to combine to create diminished capacity, which, although not a defense, may be argued to the jury. And if you have a sympathetic jury that accepts that, they may find that he was not able to premeditate his crimes, which would lessen the punishment greatly.
Now, what about this, we just heard at the end of our setup, a sort of provocative statement by his attorney saying, I'm not putting the war on trial, but the war is on trial. Now, you want to start there, Gary Solis? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that if he's going to put the war on trial, that inevitably the Army must be put on trial. Why did the Army send this gent back for a fourth tour? Why didn't they be more careful in investigating his possible PTSD? And so I think he says it, but I would expect that there will be an attack on the Army as well.
Eugene Fidel, what does it play some explicit role, or is it more implicit in the background of all this?
Gee, maybe it's implicit in the background, but gosh, that strikes me as a very tricky and hazardous defense strategy. The narrative of this case hasn't emerged yet, and if that's the narrative, I would not want to endorse it. I think, you know, there's an old saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, but I would hope that the defense would have something more directly related to this immediate set of allegations than testing the war.
You're agreeing?
I do agree, and I think the military judge is going to stop any attempt by the defense to put the government, the war, or the Army on trial, and he will direct them to stay with the facts of the case.
Just briefly looking at what happens next, we don't know yet whether there would be the government would be asking for the death penalty, right?
We do not until a case is referred by the commanding general.
And then what happens?
Well, then at some point we're going to have dueling psychiatrists. That is, there's going to be psychiatric examinations, and down the line an Article 32 investigation akin to a pretrial investigation. And the investigating officer will make a recommendation as to whether or not the case should go forward.
And Eugene Fidel, does history tell us that this process takes a while, a good while? How long?
Well, I think the trial could begin, that is, arraignment could take place later this year, maybe late this year, possibly early next year, because there's going to be a lot of preliminary investigation that has to take place, both for the government and for the defense. Now, if you ask me how long it will be before this case is over, including all appeals and reviews, that has to be calculated in years rather than months. So I think everybody should, aside from not either convicting or acquitting Staff Sergeant Bales, through commentary, everybody should relax for a while and wait until the evidence unfolds. And the first step in that process will be the Article 32 investigation.
All right, Eugene Fidel, Gary Solis, thank you both very much.